Hey.
Doo-doo.
Hi
I
there.
feel like a movie star.
You are a movie star. My name is Amanda Patello, and I proudly serve on the restaurant marketing team here at OpenTable. We are so grateful to welcome all of you to our In It Together weekly webinar series today. If you like what you hear, we hope you'll consider joining us for future webinars every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Before we get started, a few quick housekeeping items. If you have questions along the way, please use the Q&A box in the top right corner of your console. We will save time towards the end of our conversation to answer a couple of your questions. In the resources list section on the bottom left, we have linked out to our restaurant blog, our COVID-related resource center, today's featured charity, and the registration page for future episodes. This webinar will be recorded and shared with all of you afterwards. And with that, I'm delighted to now turn it over to our host of the series, our very own Chief Operating Officer, Andrea Johnston.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. This is our third webinar, and what topic could be more relevant than thinking about your P&L? And so for today, we've got Dan Simons and Brad Mendelson. They're going to talk about when the COVID crisis hit, how they reevaluated the P&L and how to pivot now and into the future. So by way of introduction, Dan opened Founding Farmers in DC, I think over a decade ago, and he's now got 7 restaurants and a distillery in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. He's an excellent businessman. He's an awesome restaurateur and just a wonderful human. I've known him for a long time, so pleased he could join. And then Brad and I just had the great opportunity to meet in the last week, and he runs a CPA firm out of DC as well, with a ton of restaurants that he's helping through this crisis. So with that, let me ask you, Dan, what, aside from terrible, what have the last 3 weeks been like for you?
Well, you know, every day is sort of like a week or a month or a year. So in this most recent kind of set of weeks, I think we've put behind us the initial like totally awfulness. You know, March 16th was laying off 100 people. So for me, it was about, you know, losing 90% of our revenue, 97% of our revenue, laying off, you know, over 1,000 people, 97% of our staff. That was kind of the phase that's way back. And now the last couple of weeks have been about launching a new business model, adapting and changing our P&L to try to build a sustainable model. And we're in the hiring and growth phase, along with like picking up the pieces and dealing with the, you know, just daily debacle and difficulty that everybody is. But that's my kind of current snapshot.
And Brad, you're supporting all these restaurants during this period. Talk to us about your weeks.
Been trying to learn a lot, as much as I can, about all the different PPP programs, the EIDL, some of the state and local government grants that are available out there, and transmit that information to all my clients so they can use as much money as possible and get as much and use it properly to have as much forgiven, which now we're not even sure all the specific parameters about how that will work, but still working through it, looking for more information from the government.
Great. And then, and can you talk to us both, maybe Dan, you start, when you first thought about changing your business model to grocery, I think you also even thought about turning your distillery into hand sanitizer making. Can you talk about how you first had that conversation with Brad and what went through your mind on how to do that?
Yeah, so, you know, we looked at our numbers and the reality of our fixed cost and the reality of what we wanted to try to support. And we'd made a commitment to the 1,100 people that we laid off that we were going to try to figure out. We kept 80 people. And we said, okay, with this skeleton crew, how do we honor the commitment? And the commitment was we were going to give free food to everybody we laid off every day. So that was kind of all I could see in the moment. And then we thought, well, to do that, we're going to need to spend a certain amount of money. So like, what's our new break even at what I started to call a gross margin level? And so I talked to Brad and I talked to our in-house team, and we figured, you know, we're not paying rent and we're not paying down any of the tons of money that's on our normal accounts payable. And instead we said, well, what's our payroll right now? What's our cost of goods and our purchases if we pretended we didn't owe any money in the past? What are our packaging costs and what are our health insurance costs? And so we looked at how we could get to break even on this really tiny, shrunk down business. And that was our first goal of creating revenue just with curbside and delivery to get to that first break even. And then we said, okay, well, this can get us, keep our nose like right above that total drowning line. And then we put our heads on what's an entirely new business model that we could create and put on top of, the restaurant menu. And that's what led us to market and grocery.
And Brad, how have you leaned in to sort of guide Dan on what to pay, who to pay, even how to price some of the stuff that's being sold?
Right. Well, I think a lot of that he has worked out with his team, and we've worked with them a little bit and helping with obtaining whatever government funds are available to help through this as well, that we've been able to support him doing all that stuff as well.
And with regard to that, I'm just curious, has PPP come through and helped, or any of the other things? I know there's a lot of applications out there right now.
As far as I have seen, plenty of people that have received confirmation of a loan number, which generally I've been told means that you have been accepted and funding may come in 10 days to 2 weeks. But I haven't seen too many people that have actually been funded yet from this PPP loan. Had a few people get the $10,000 grant from the SBA, but nothing further than that.
And so in light of that, Dan, how are you thinking about it? You're at just nose break even on things. Are you running this at each of your restaurants, and how are you thinking about running it out of one versus another?
So of my 7 restaurants, plus the distillery, so the distillery is still operating and we're able to make booze sporadically, but we converted it. We went all in on hand sanitizer. So that business is going, and it's a relatively small business. The 7 restaurants, we have actually gone from breaking even to really being in growth mode. And so I have one restaurant where our sales are at or above what we were doing as a restaurant. And that's why for us, it was about creating an entirely new business and figuring out like, where are our customers? What do they want? And how do we meet them there? So I just drew kind of a simple cloud for myself as I'm like sketching out of like, where are the customers and what do they want? And I knew they were at the curb, and I knew they were in their home, and I knew that just our restaurant menu wasn't meeting enough of their needs or at a price point that they could order from frequently. And so we developed the whole new product line. We've converted 4 of our 7 locations so far, and the 5th one, which is in King of Prussia, just outside Philly, goes live on Friday this week. And so that'll be 5 of 7. And then we're going to pause there. We're doing a big push on Mother's Day to go. And then we may convert a 6th one. I have a 7th restaurant that I probably don't think will convert to market and grocery, but it's doing pretty well with to go and curbside delivery right now.
That's incredible. Are you surprised by how the financials have shaken out with the current demand out there?
Yeah, I'm totally surprised because, this whole thing is terrifying, right? It's terrifying as a business person, but it's more terrifying as a leader. What I'm worried about is my team that I laid off. Not everybody has access or qualifies for unemployment. And so we didn't know if this would work. It sounded good on paper. We've got some good experience on our team. We happen to have big kitchens where we cook from scratch. We happen to have our own bakery, and I've got some experience with my partner and I in our background doing markets and bakeries. So I would say it's performing much better than I thought. And I think there are opportunities for other restaurateurs out there. And that's why I want to, share as much of this message. For us, it wasn't about adding a few provisions to the restaurant menu. It was about creating a new business model of market, grocery, and bakery, all new margins, and talk about tax and accounting. How are these different products taxed at different tax rates? What are the labeling laws at the FDA? There's a lot. I mean, lean in is more like throw yourself in. But I do think that there's a business model for, for restaurateurs out there. It may not work for everybody, but I know it can work for a lot. And our supply chains can be more robust right now than some of the grocery store folks for what we are able to merchandise and sell on our website.
And are you going to, I know founding farmers, I mean, you're very farm to table, a lot of local suppliers. So are you using those same folks to provision your stores now?
Yeah, so this is, we are partners in North Dakota. The North Dakota Farmers Union represents almost 50,000 farmers. They own an 18-wheeler, and so that truck is still running, from North Dakota through Wisconsin. It actually picks up some grits for us in Kentucky. We're still running that truck into DC twice a month with full loads. So, and then we're buying a ton of local produce, obviously here, because it's a good season for us. So, this is an incredibly difficult time for restaurants and obviously all of our employees. It's also a really difficult and scary time for the farmers, at the start of the supply chain, and then frankly, the processors and the folks who move the products through. So I think anytime that you can study your supply chain and understand that source, and maybe this is a time to, if you're able to build some sales, look at your dairy provider and understand who's doing that milk, and make sure it's connecting back to an independently owned producer instead of one of the big corporate monsters.
It's awesome.
I think Andrea is frozen, Amanda.
Yeah. Jumping in here. Dan, last time we talked, you said it's hard to make a restaurant work if your primes are over 60%, which still holds true with the pivot. Can you elaborate there?
Yeah, so it is an entirely new business model because the margins are different, but I think the P&L aspect that all restaurateurs can relate to is prime costs. Everybody, listening and everybody out there knows that it's all about, cost of goods plus labor. So we're still shooting for that, 60% or under with cost of goods and labor. And what happens in the market and grocery model is your COGS go up. We're selling a lot of produce and the margin's not great. We're selling a ton of bottles of wine, but not at restaurant wine prices. We have to compete with the wine shop. So COGS goes up, but labor comes down. Our average order is about $110, whereas my average check average in our restaurant was about $30 per person. And that was blended breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So we're still operating the restaurant menu, which brings the cost of goods down, but it's on pretty thin labor. And then my staff has just adapted to learning new jobs, and we built some new compensation models. Tipping's out the window, which frankly I don't miss. And we're focused on building a model with a living wage for everybody, which I think is pretty exciting. But it's still about total prime costs. And then obviously I'm not paying rent, and I don't think anybody should be paying their rent right now. I think your money needs to go towards people or product or packaging or the things that are a must day to day. You set aside all the other expenses to figure out later.
Yeah, and that was one of my follow-up questions for you, Brad. I know that you consult with a number of restaurants and restaurant groups. What is the reality of fixed costs that you need to take into consideration upon reopening?
Right.
Which ones defer, do away with, and where should you focus?
Right. Try to do away with it as much as possible. But the first thing is going to have to be to talk to the landlord and get them to make some kind of adjustments to the monthly rent, because going forward, each restaurant is not going to be able to have as many people in the restaurant. And so the original lease agreement and the monthly payments are just not going to be sustainable going forward. There's not going to be the kind of revenue to make the restaurant sustainable going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you found that the clients that you've worked with have been able to have successful conversations with their landlords and navigate those waters?
I've had a couple that were able to adjust their rent and pay either half rent or defer it to some point in time in the future. Maybe it's tack it on to the end of the lease or something like that. But I've definitely had some, because the landlords have to understand that there just isn't any money to pay the rent at this point in time. Hopefully there will be in the future, but just not at the same levels as there were before.
Amanda, I want to chime in on that. I think it's incredibly important for every restaurant owner, operator, restaurateur, chef out there. We're not paying rent, and I think that needs to be the first message, and then the second message needs to be said with respect and fairness and clarity to our landlords, which is, hey, we know that you have a business model too. Right. And, I think sometimes the mistake can be to assume that landlords are rich and landlords have money. I think maybe that is kind of true, except they're also leveraged and they're in a very different business than us. And they might drive nicer cars and have bigger buildings. But it's going to take a coming together of landlords, their lenders. And 99% of every restaurateur out there who's leasing their space, their landlord has a banker, and the landlord doesn't own that building, right? So they have a business model. So I think the first thing is to send a clear message. We don't have any money, and I'm not going to start giving you money just so I can go out of business. I'm not going to pay my rent so I can not pay my people. I'm not going to go pay you rent so I can not buy food. I'm not going to pay you rent so I can not pay my people's health insurance. But work with me and let me stay in business. And I think the message to the landlords from us needs to be, we're hard workers. We're going to play the long game. We want to survive, but be in it with us. Otherwise, frankly, here are the keys and good luck with your empty space. And by the way, who are you going to put in after me? The market rate deal that existed pre-COVID with regard to leases. First of all, it was already a bad deal for restaurants. Okay. But that is out the window. This is going to be about abated rent, long-term push down the road, and percent rent deals so that restaurants can grow their business back. And I think that if this is said professionally and fairly and with respect to the fact that landlords have a business model too, then great. We need it to, we can be in it together. I think that's my approach.
Much more eloquently said than me.
No, but
Thank you.
Andrea, I'm happy to give it back to you if you'd like.
We'll see the joys of work from home internet. It's wonderful. I will probably freeze again. Anyway, thanks for jumping in, Amanda. So Dan, as you think towards, this year and into next year with your P&L and what you've got running now, like how does it look? And how are you going to balance out this new business model with, you're a hospitality restaurateur and bringing restaurants back. How are you thinking about that? And how do your financial projections think about that?
So this is that kind of find a need and fill it. How do we generate revenue? And if that's market, grocery, if that's services, whatever it is that works for an individual restaurant, or frankly, if that's staying closed until you have an opportunity to generate the revenue. I think it'll be different for everybody. What I'm doing is going to take this hybrid business model. I'm still doing the restaurant menu for to-go and delivery. I'm a little nervous about when they say we can let people back indoors because it's not a business model for me. If I take a 250-seat restaurant and I say, great, the doors are open and I have 25% of my original occupancy, what do I do with that? And by the way, if I don't feel like it's safe for my staff, I'm not doing it. I don't care what any governor or any president, says, especially one of the orange ones. So I think we have to make our own decisions that work, that are safe for us. So for me, it's a hybrid business model that as society unwinds, if the guest wants us to meet them at home, meet them at the curb, maybe meet them on our patio and we could do patio seating. Maybe we take one private space and we do family dinners there. Then we'll see what works and play the long game. But I think we're until we're in a post-COVID vaccine world, there's no amount of optimism or some silly headline on one of the news channels. The world is going to be wacky until there's a vaccine or until there's really effective therapeutics. Customers, if your customer base was over 50, folks are going to be nervous to go out for quite a while. If you're selling booze on the beach to 20-year-olds, you might be back in the game fast. So I think figure out how the business model can unwind as society starts to unwind, and look to build trust with our staff and with our guests along the way. That's how we're looking at it.
Yeah, that's great. And Brad, are any of your other clients doing something similar? And what sort of guidance are you giving them in terms of how to think through their financials and their P&L?
Right. I definitely have some that are doing some carry out and looking at that, and we're going through pricing and helping with other tax related issues and how to account for all the costs associated with it. But some, their menu or their location just didn't give the ability to do that type of sales. But Dan has probably built the biggest continuing pivot to changing his business model to something totally different.
Yes, for sure. Well, and so what to both of you, and I know we'll move to questions in a few minutes here, but what advice would you give to restaurateurs either who have closed and should maybe consider a new business model now during this period, or advice aside from rent, how they should look at their P&Ls as they think about reopening?
Go ahead, Brad.
I think right now, if the business has closed, then I think what the first thing, if you haven't already, it may be too late, but it's looking for government funds that are available, which there's all different programs, as I alluded to before, to get that money and make sure you can either pay some people, pay some other expenses that may have previously accrued, and maybe just using that money to sort of get out of a little bit of a hole that may have been there before. And then once you can reopen, just start to work your way out if possible. And if not, then maybe, this is a way to just not reopen and bite the bullet on that this, you're a sort of a piece, a casualty of this, of the virus here. Other things are just, keep people engaged, your employees and your customers engaged, and keeping you in front of them, maybe by doing different video chats or whatever else to keep your customers engaged with your business, so that when you do reopen, you're in their mind as another place to go.
Yeah, I think, if my restaurants were closed right now, I think I would be trying to, and granted, like Brad said, if a restaurant was already struggling and wasn't going to make it under a mountain of debt already, then frankly, this situation might create a more gentle exit path to closure and dealing with that calamity. I don't say that lightly, and I know neither does Brad. My first restaurant failed. It's awful. It was a long time ago, and the scar runs deep. But if my restaurant were closed right now, I think what I would be doing is kind of leapfrogging forget the moment, because you can't do anything aside from closing your restaurant down safely, thinking about food safety, making sure you have great connections and comms so you can reach out to your staff, do weekly updates to your staff, getting the restaurant clean. I would then be thinking about how I relaunch my brand, and I would be spending the time working on the employee screening protocols. Maybe there's a new look to your employee uniforms that conveys a message of safety or sanitation. Maybe there's a different way that you're going to do seating. Obviously, with tech partners like OpenTable, none of us are going to have it's devastating, but I'm thinking, I can't have 50 people in the lobby waiting for a table. So how do I maximize throughput? So I think planning on what's the menu, how you're going to turn tables with no wait or with no bar, and how you're going to build a message and a campaign of public trust. There might be a whole to-do list that a restaurateur could develop for themselves if they're closed right now to prepare for that future. And for the folks that are open, look, it's all about workplace safety right now. That's the thing that I think all of us are losing sleep over and building new protocols. So self-screenings at home, screenings upon arrival, right at the front door, uniforms, PPE, supply chain of the PPE, and then, how you can communicate this to your customers. Obviously, we have to do all that on the usual foundation of running restaurants isn't easy, but those are some of the things that are on the top of my radar right now.
Yeah, definitely a lot of rethinking going into all of this. I guess the last question before we cut to the audience is, what have been some of your biggest learnings during this period for both of you?
So, look, it's clear to me that culture and taking care of people wins the day. And so I know a lot of restaurant owners, operators, chefs, managers who care deeply for their staff. And I think those are the folks that will have a higher likelihood of getting through this. I realize that heart and love and integrity is different than having cash on hand. But I have seen that, if you want to climb a mountain that looks unclimbable, you got to have a team that is willing to try to do the impossible. So it's been a real reinforcement that culture wins the day. I like that because we've never been the guys in the room with the most money. We've never been the guys in the room with the most resource. And so my team and the culture that everybody's committed to wins the day. So, that may not be a lesson, but I think that's a silver lining or a positive reinforcement for the conscious capitalists out there. I actually love seeing the lesson get taught to companies that, what I think are just like raw capitalists. And I like seeing them get burned in the media and skewered. And I think that can also open the door for take the high road and do the right thing. And that will, and again, I know it isn't cash on hand, but I think that this has taught a lot of those lessons. And another lesson for me is that the system we had didn't really work anyways, right? I think there's wacky stuff with the tip model. It's insane to be in a country where everybody doesn't have access to health insurance. It's insane to have people, working 2 jobs who don't have more than 2 weeks of pay saved. So I think that there'll be some lessons that come out of this, that we have a chance to kind of rebuild our businesses in a better way because we have a chance to get the government's attention to allow us to change things. I mean, not being able to share tips with kitchen employees is just the stupidest law ever. And so now I think we have a chance, and I hope a silver lining in the lessons that get learned by the politicos and the electeds, that we may be able to change some of those things to build better restaurants in the future. We need a long bridge and a lot of support to get there. But I think those are some of the silver linings for me.
Brad, anything to add as you overlook so many restaurants?
I think a lot of it is keeping in touch with employees, with just remaining that semblance of a business, whether if it's keeping touch with everybody and just the message that people are throwing out there about your business, and in keeping on social media and other things, and just keeping in touch and being in front of people, that it will be a lesson about going forward in keeping your name out there.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you. Amanda, do you want to lead us through some of the questions that have come in from the audience?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. There are no shortage of questions. So lots to talk about here. Before we jump into those, I know that for today's episode, Dan, you chose Martha's Table as the charity beneficiary for today. So just wondering if you want to speak to the organization and share why you chose it.
Yeah, they do a super job. They're based in Washington, D.C., and they have kind of a multi-pronged model where they are trying to help feed folks who are, food insecure and who need access to food, while at the same time they're educating folks both about nutrition and food and other ways, through educational programs that they can improve people's lives. So it's a wonderful organization that is getting to the folks who need the help the most. And I know it's easy, at least for me, to get in my kind of Facebook echo chamber or what I see on social media and, what I'm worried about with employees or businesses. But obviously these situations are taking, as always, right, the people in the most difficult situations, socioeconomically, maybe, and it's just awful and so difficult in those communities. So Martha's Table is a wonderful organization, and I think getting some support into them, I donate there, and I know that it at least makes me feel like I'm getting, it's often to neighborhoods I might not be in or that I don't know so well, but those neighborhoods have a beating heart and they need support.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing them with us today. Appreciate it. On the questions front, there are plenty of questions around the PPP loan. I know a couple of weeks ago when we spoke to Will Gadaren, Anthony Rudolph, Will said, take the money, take the loan. But now there seems to be more clarifying questions around it. So one of them being, if a restaurant is awarded the PPP money, what is the latest rule on staff? What if not all your staff come back and you're accountable for spending on 100% of payroll?
Well, if you don't use all the money, or at least 75% of the money, you can give it back. You can get this money, put it into your bank account, pay the employees that do come back, because some of them may not. They may be making more money on unemployment with the changes in those rules than you would be paying them in payroll. So if you can't use all that money and it's not all forgiven, you can return it and there won't be any interest charged on it. So that is something that could be done.
Yeah, PPP, and I obviously lean on accountants, like Brad and experts. Here's my current take on it. It's we're still waiting for confirmation. We struck out in the first round, which was kind of heartbreaking because I hadn't really read all the details. I was just like, oh, here's a government program. I'm hopeful that we'll get some in this round. So now I've started to really study it. And here's the bad news for all of us in the restaurant industry. As written, PPP doesn't work. So I think I'm probably in a smaller bucket where I'm adding jobs. We laid off 100 people. We've rehired 275 people, and PPP still doesn't work for me because if you don't hire back over 75% of your full-time equivalents, basically
100%.
Sorry, 100% of your full. So you have to hit all of your FTE rehires, your full-time equivalent rehires, to then get to hit the forgiveness ratio. So the problem is if you're closed or you're allowed to open for, a quarter of your occupancy. So we've been pushing hard at the legislative level, and I say we, just our industry. And it sounds like there is support on both sides of the aisle to essentially fix PPP. So that if you get PPE money, if they fix it so that our forgiveness window isn't like between now and June 28th, which is hard to hire 100% of your people. Plus, you could rehire your people, except as I'm sure everybody knows, some of your people will say, don't rehire me. I will make more money on unemployment. You can't force them onto your payroll because that would force them off unemployment. So obviously, if you have employees that aren't eligible for whatever reason for unemployment, they'd be happy to be rehired and paid even if they stayed at home. So my advice on PPP is, get with a great accountant like Brad and really understand that rule and then see what works for you right now, and then pay close attention to a potential legislative fix. So if you get PPP, you might want to hold it for a moment before you decide how to deploy it. Because if you deploy it in one way and then they change the rules again, you may miss that opportunity.
Great to hear that you've already been able to rehire back 275 plus employees. Dan, have you had a chance to think through what percentage of employees or team you'll be able to bring back on the other side of this? Does this change the model around tipping versus hospitality included? I know you spoke to before the living wage model. How does this change things on the staffing front for you?
Well, yeah, I do. For us, I think grocery and prepared foods and home delivery, and that is here to stay in some ratio. I don't know what. I do think that this is going to change the staffing model. So even for restaurants that are used to being full and turning tables and leveraging awesome tech like OpenTable to do that, which my team, I think, was really good at, not me, but my team, we're not going to have that kind of like 50 people just standing there waiting. So that means our throughput is down, which means our total transactions are down, and we can't just raise prices. My restaurants are pretty affordable. And so that means we have to figure out a different way to manage the guest at the table. So I connect this to, I don't think the guests are going to want us handing the same menu to people over and over and over. So I'm looking at a front of the house labor model where every guest brings their own POS. Everybody is holding a digital device. Payment will be contactless. And maybe servers are a little bit more like sommeliers or ambassadors, kind of like working a larger station so that they can handle more tables. So one of the ratios has to change. You can't just do the same, customer to server ratio, but with just less sales. It won't work. So I think that maybe there's a chance to change, like get rid of tips, go to something that gets you around the law, meaning like, if you add we all know this topic, right? Like gratuities, they can only be shared in a certain way, depends on the state you're in, certain limitations. If you use the tip credit, or as some folks call it, a sub-minimum wage. So I think, I won't ramble on too long about it, but I am expecting some different staffing model that at least while we get through these unwinding phases, but even once we're allowed to be open 100%, we're not gonna be jammed, and are people really gonna be waiting at the bar? So I think the service model is going to have to change.
Yeah, there was a question in regards to your earlier comment, Dan, in regards to accounts payable. To clarify, the question was, has he delayed all of those past balances and is currently paying all current invoices? Can you speak to that, and any advice, Dan or Brad, that you're giving to your clients as well?
So we looked at our whole accounts payable. I'm too scared to even tell the public how much money that we owe. If you actually add up our whole AP list, the number is daunting. And I went to all the vendors that I still need to buy from. And I said, hey, how about you guys accept that I'm not going to pay you now what I owe you historically, but if you want to have a shot at me paying what I owe you historically, let's kind of like start from scratch right now, and I'll keep you current, like net 25 days right now. Help me get my business going so that I can get supply. I'll make enough money from what I buy from you right now to pay you what I buy from you, and I'm leaving that AP sitting there. And I think all but one or two of my vendors have been really supportive. We had one vendor that was like, we're going to send it to collections. I'm like, go ahead. So that's how we have vendors delivering to us now on those sorts of arrangements. And then they're going to hopefully help us to live to fight another day. And then at some point, I think everything for everybody on this call, everything we all owe on accounts payable, it's going to get negotiated down, right? Because either we're not going to exist, and then good luck getting zero, or what percentage of our AP can we pay you, or over what time? And those vendors will play the long game, and they'll get something, and they'll be the ones that do business, I think, sensibly. And so that's how I'm looking at AP.
That's helpful. Brad, anything else to add there or share?
Yeah, and I think that's a great suggestion on holding those old payables, but whatever is paid on those is really going to come from future profits. That you're going to have to take profits from, hopefully if there are some, from September, October, November, to pay bills from January and February. So hopefully at some point you'll be able, or all the restaurants will be able to dig out from that, either by renegotiating or by using those future profits, and going to have to bite that bullet to remain open to continue on.
And similar to your recommendations from earlier in regards to connecting with your landlord and sharing that we're all in this together and how we kind of get through it to see to the other side is really helpful. I know before the webinar started today, we were kind of jamming, and you were talking about 2020 tax implications and what that means based on kind of a cratering P&L. this year. So is there anything that you can speak to there as it applies to taxes for this year or previous or whatnot?
Yeah, well, the payment of any income taxes, at least federal taxes, the calculation would be based off of a percentage of last year's tax or 90% of your 2020 tax. So you could defer paying your 2020 tax if there are no profits, because the tax rate on zero is still zero. So if there are no profits in 2020, whatever money you may have saved from the first quarter to hold to pay taxes, you can just use that for other purposes. And then if there are profits later in the year, then there'd be tax due on that money. And each state is actually different for the timing of their tax payments that are due. So you'd have to check with your own individual state as to when those taxes are due and the calculation of those payments, how to make them.
Amanda, I do think, I just want to emphasize that. I think like this is an example, you know, like you have an accountant like Brad with this kind of expertise. And so that can sound like one little data point that people might have heard today, but that tidbit could be wildly valuable to an individual, you know, to a restaurant owner or a chef's personal tax planning as far as their cash flow. So if anybody didn't catch that tidbit from Brad, I would, you know, follow up on that. I know that could be really relevant for somebody, and it's not something that people might think of, you know, right off the bat.
Great, thank you. And Brad, maybe we can dive into some additional content around that we can share out with our broader OpenTable restaurant base and stuff as well. So
sure.
Love to have a continued conversation there. In regards to, you know, keeping revenue streams open and hopefully building them going into the future, can you speak, Dan, to marketing strategies and channels that you've flexed during this time to connect with your current customers as well as reach new guests as well?
Yeah, so we've been, I mean, I think as always, right, it's about social media. So I've been saying this for a while and I still say it now in COVID time. Social media you know, boosting on Facebook is still an incredible, like it's got great ROI. And so I think search engine optimization, thinking about the new search strings, right? So if you don't do search engine optimization for your website, but yet you're offering curbside delivery, you really need to figure what people are typing in now is like curbside delivery near me. And so I think any of the SEO stuff, or, you know, I'm not such a huge fan of direct pay-per-click, but I love boosted ads on social platforms, and I like search engine optimization, especially with that near me string, since it's what, you know, people are typing in toilet paper near me. And so if your restaurant pops up as your restaurant plus bodega, tacos near me. So that's applied pre-COVID, but I think really matters now. But those are the places that I'm doing it. And then, you know, cause-related marketing and telling your stories. I think, you know, if you've got a restaurant somewhere and the message you can push out is, you know, for every $25 you spend in an order with me, I donate a sandwich to, you know, firefighters, healthcare workers, you know, a charity like Martha's Table. I think, you know, the general public has been so supportive of restaurants so far that I think to not play on it, but to give the diner a chance to like, oh, order from this restaurant, and I feel like I'm doing good, I would try to include that into as much of your marketing message as you can.
Well, that's remarkable. I mean, this industry is known for being so charitable and generous to others, and it's so amazing to hear that restaurants continue to do so even during times of need for restaurants themselves. So thank you. I know we are at time for today, but I just wanted to thank all three of you for joining us, for sharing your energy, your expertise, your experience, giving hopefully a bit of normalcy and hope to the group here today as we move through this together. I invite all of you to join us next week when Jessica Coslow and Edward Lee join us in discussing how to feed and care for other hospitality employees. Until then, stay safe, take care of yourself and others, and thank you.
And
thanks, Brad.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Dan.